As far as I know, human beings are the only species that have the capacity to do something. And that something sets us apart, I believe, from all other living creatures. Although I believe dogs and a variety of other animals clearly think and have a range of emotion, it is we who walk around on 2 feet, who seemingly have the unique inclination and propensity to ask, why? Walk the aisle of any great library, gaze at book titles, and it's apparent that people have pondered why for thousands of years. Why is asked in response to the benign and trivial, like, why is my coffee so hot? To the perplexing and significant, like, why is there so much suffering? Yes, people wonder why about all kinds of things. The late, great Robin Williams once asked, why do they call it rush hour when nothing seems to move? And Woody Allen quipped, why are our days numbered and not, say, lettered? And Charles Schulz offered this, sometimes I lie awake at night and ask, why me? And then a voice answers, Charles, nothing personal, your name just happened to come up. Some people, however, despite what I've said, are a bit cynical when it comes to why questions. The atheist Stephen Hawking states, why are we here? Where did we come from? Traditionally, these are questions for philosophy, but philosophy is dead. And Kurt Vonnegut wrote, here we are. There is no why. But despite such views, I believe it is of vital importance that every one of us here today spend time each and every day of our lives getting in to why questions. Questions like, why am I here right now at this place in this very time? Why am I in Snowmass Village right now on Sunday, July 5th? Why am I alive? Why have certain things come my way and others not? Just to name a few. Hundreds of years before Jesus was born, we know that Socrates purportedly said the unexamined life is not worth living. And although I believe all lives are of worth, there is little question in my mind that our days are immensely richer, far more purposeful, contributive, and value-laden if we struggle mightily with why. Recently, there was a column in the New York Times. Here are some excerpts. A person writes, what is the purpose of my life? As late as 50 years ago, we could consult lofty figures to help us answer such questions. Some of these were theologians. All of that seems to have gone away over the past generation or two. Intellectual prestige has drifted away from theologians, poets, and philosophers toward neuroscientists, economists, evolutionary biologists, and big data analysts. These scholars have a lot of knowledge to bring, but they are not in the business of ultimate questions. There's an amazing hunger out there to shift the conversation. People are ready to talk a little less about how to do things and to talk a little bit more about why. End quote. Well, frankly, if indeed such a shift is happening in our culture, if we are becoming more interested in why, I believe that's really good news. You see, when we're willing to ask why and grapple with why wherever we are in life, whatever stage of life we're in, whatever we are struggling with, it can lead to a foundation that moves our lives from blandness to passion, passivity to action, confusion to clarity, observing to serving, and from being a taker to being an extraordinary difference maker. And while wrestling with the big questions as people is part of what it means to be a follower of Jesus, there is something else that is evident about all of this, and that has to do with organizations, even religious ones like the chapel. You see, for any organization to be truly successful, including the chapel, for any organization to be successful, success being defined in a multiplicity of ways, the organization has to be very crystal clear on why it exists. This is perhaps why one person writes, God is always more interested in why we do something than in what we do. So this morning I begin a sermon series on why. Why life? Why are we alive to begin with? Why does this chapel exist in Snowmass Village, Colorado? Why does the chapel even matter? And what's intriguing to me is that I believe the answers to these varied questions are in fact the same, as I will get into. It's important with regard to the chapel that asking why the chapel exists is not the same thing as understanding and defining what we do and how we do it. By now, most of you are very familiar with what we do and how we do it, like things like worship and music and supporting organizations up and down this valley and people in dire straits from here all the way to Haiti. Things like Stephen Ministry and all the care we offer people, Project 18, all of our children, youth, and family programs, crisis intervention, helping people in their darkest moments, helping people face addictions, physical rehab, the vicissitudes of old age, adult spiritual formation. The list goes on and on and on and on. But this series is not about what we do, but why we do these things. And why a person might just want to be part of Snowmass Chapel. Why you might want to serve. Why you might want to give. Why you might want to engage. Why you might want to involve yourself in a community of faith. And as we get into this series, I need to be clear that none of what I say is my idea. I've plagiarized it all. You see, it comes from another source, one vastly more reliable than what my very limited, fallible, sometimes broken human brain can come up with. So let's begin. It was Monday or Tuesday of Jesus' last week of life. Lines had been drawn in the sand, and Jesus crossed every single one of them. He alienated and angered just about everybody, whether governmental or secular, and especially those who were most religious. The religious leaders were at it. Person after person tossed questions Jesus' way, hoping that Jesus would take the bait and say something that would be indefensible in any court of law. Instead, Jesus' answers to a wide array of questions astonished and amazed many. And there was a man there that Monday or Tuesday who was very frustrated and ticked off at Jesus. And boy, was he religious. He knew all the doctrine, all the dogma. He knew who was in and who was out. He was smart. He was well-trained. He was savvy. And he was a brilliant lawyer. And he gets into Jesus' face. He is confident he can trip this Jesus up with just the right question. He says, Jesus, you got it down. Look at all your followers. You know so much. You know history. You know law. You know about everything. You know the 1,613 laws of Scripture. No one can cite them like you can. You know what the good book says from cover to cover. You have down pat what every generation has said about God. You have down pat what every prophet has said to humankind. So tell me, Jesus, what's the bottom line? And without hesitation, with razor-sharp precision, Jesus replies, love. Jesus says, I'll say it again. love. Love God with all of who you are in every way that you can. Love God with all of your heart and all of your soul and all of your mind. And go and love every single human being, even those you detest, in exactly the same way. Jesus said everything that has ever been said, everything that has ever been taught at the heart of Scripture, at the heart of faith, at the heart of religion, at the heart of religious institutions, at the heart of traditions, at the heart of all issues, the centerpiece of it all, the centerpiece of life. The point is love. The essence of everything is love. Why are we alive? Why are you here in Snowmass Village on Sunday, July 5th? Why are you here at this chapel, whether you're a regular part of it or not? Why are you part of your community of faith wherever you spend most of your time? Why have you been given the gifts you've been given? Why have you been given the resources you've been given? Why have you been given the career you've been given? Why have you been given the opportunities you've been given? Why have you been given the problems you've been given? Why have you been given the friends you have given? Why have you been given the children you've been given? Jesus says, love. One of Jesus' closest followers, John, was an apostle. He wrote the Gospel of John. He wrote the book of Revelation. He wrote 3 letters that we know of. And this is what John says, who followed Jesus and got it. This is what he says in his first letter. My beloved friends, let us continue to love each other, since love comes from God. Everyone who loves is born of God. Everyone who loves experiences a relationship with God. The person who refuses to love doesn't know the first thing about God, because God is love. So you can't know God if you don't love. And if your life ain't about love, it ain't about God. And this is how God showed his love for us. God sent his only Son into the world so that we might live through him. That's the kind of love we're talking about. And if we love each other, God dwells within us. Love becomes complete in us. When we take up a permanent residence and live our lives in the house of love, we live in God and God lives in us. There is no room in love for fear, John writes. Well-formed love banishes fear. Fear is crippling, a fearful life, fear of death, fear of judgment is not a life fully formed in love. We, though, are going to love and be loved. Christ is blunt. These verses of John, in my view, are some of the most profound and transforming in all Scripture because they echo the straightforward, very straightforward and simple message of what Jesus said in Matthew 22. John's words really convey what love is, the source of love, just some of the effects of love, the purpose of love. I'm going to be getting into a lot of these things in the weeks ahead, but just to touch on a few of things, here we learn something very profound, that God is love. Love is God. The essence of God is love. We need to say this over and over and over and over again. You think you've heard this message before? I've heard this message before. Thousands and millions of Christians have heard it before, but then why do Christians continue to muddle up this very straightforward, simple message? Across the course of centuries, human beings have done a fine job of messing Matthew 22 up, especially Christians. I'm tired of liberals and conservatives who say they're Christians get on television talking about issues and not mentioning that God is love and everything hinges on love. These verses also point to the source of love. Love comes from God. Yes, it comes from hormones, God-given. Yes, it comes from neurochemistry, God-given. Yes, it comes from life history, God-given in our own choices. But God is ultimately where the experience of human love comes from. And because God is the source of love, the effect of this is that when we love, we experience God. Love means we're in relationship with God, John writes. You might even say the more we love, the more we're in touch with God. Want to get close to God? Love. Feel like God is far away? Love. Wonder where God is? Love. And another effect of love, of God within, which I mentioned many other times, but I can't fail to touch on it very briefly here, is everything to do with fear. John writes that love and fear are not compatible because God and fear are not compatible. And while life happens to all of us, even really tough stuff, ultimately we need not be afraid. We don't need to fear death, life, certainly not judgment, because fear has to do with punishment, and God is not punishment, God is love. So when we're fearful, I believe it's God's call to us to get back in touch with love. So what does all of this have to do with the chapel and our lives? Well, said another way, when we get it, I mean when we really get it, that the whole point of everything is love, however imperfectly in our humanness, we will be living out the life God intends, and our lives will be in alignment with why God gave us life to begin with. The why of my life? Love. The why of your life? I believe, love. The why of every religious institution? Love. And frankly, I guess when I take my last breath, I would rather my life being about love than getting my thinking right. This spring, I had an amazing experience. Actually, Charlotte was with me. We were at a national preaching conference. And we heard a preacher who preached probably one of the finest sermons I've ever heard. And as I was listening to him preach, I was thinking about the 4 churches that I've served. I thought about the churches that I served along with all the leaders of those parishes that have struggled with mission statements and strategic plans and goals and objectives and programs and stewardship and all the other things that churches do, which are important, obviously. But as I think a lot about my own role in these things, as I think about a lot of what churches do, it just hit me that I made it far too darn complicated and too complex. Because you see, this thing we call church is neither complex nor complicated. It's astonishingly straightforward and crystal clear. Why? Love. Love's the vision. Love is the mission statement. Love is the goal. Love is the objective. Love is the path. Love is the destination. Love of God, love of people. And you know what's interesting is that in Matthew 22, Jesus didn't add anything to that statement. So why on earth would we? Michael Curry is newly elected presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church. He loves Jesus. Charlotte and I had the privilege of spending a morning with him this spring. African-American preacher. Loves Jesus. That's why I thought he wouldn't get elected. But he loves Jesus. And here's a little excerpt from what he said. Michael gets it. He spent his whole career. And he gets it. He said something like the following in a way that I can't emulate. I wish I was a great black preacher, but he is. He said it doesn't matter how religious something is. It doesn't matter how religious someone is. It doesn't matter how holy somebody is. It doesn't matter how sanctimonious somebody is. It doesn't matter how obedient somebody is. It doesn't matter how knowledgeable somebody is. It doesn't matter how many chapters and verses can be cited. It doesn't matter what's worn at church, what music is played, how full the parking lot is, how many people are at the service, how long the service is, what words are used, what the temperature of the building is. If it's not about love, if it's not about loving God, if it's not about loving people, it ain't of God, period. I don't know why it's taking me so long to get so clear on this very straightforward truth. But in every meeting I'm going to attend from now on, every board meeting, every committee meeting, and I don't attend them all, but I'm going to ask everyone there, what does this have to do with love? What does this have to do with loving God and loving people? If it doesn't have to do with loving God and loving people, we're not going to do it. It's got to be about love. Love, it's that simple, it's that clear, it is that hard. And let me finish with this. Don't think that the love that I'm talking about is mushy or sentimental. You see, it was love itself. It was love in the flesh. It was Jesus, love itself, that hung on the hard wood of the cross for you and me. That's the kind of love I'm talking about. You see, when very, very, very self-righteous religious folks tried to put a permanent end to Jesus by crucifying him, they killed him not because they couldn't deal with him. They killed him because they couldn't deal with love. Think about that. So the question I leave you with is a very personal question. The kind of love that hung on the cross. The kind of love the religious people couldn't deal with because they wanted to be right. Can you and I live lives that are all about